Welcome to the LeaderCast podcast, a weekly deep dive into the stories that transformed our guests into leaders worth following. I'm your host, Joe Boyd. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being a listener. One simple thing you can do to help us out is give a review wherever you listen. Today's guest is Deepak Shukla. He's the founder of Pearl Lemon, which is a marketing company that has gone on to do lots of other things. I have to tell you something, just had this conversation. It gets personal in a way I didn't expect, and hang in there with this because I think this might be exactly what you need to hear today. Deepak Shukla, welcome to the LeaderCast podcast. Super excited to have you. Thanks all the way over in the UK. Thanks for joining us.
Listen, I'm happy to be here, excited to, well, of course, it's a cliche, but to talk about leadership and hopefully share something that's compelling and actionable for the audience. So thank you for having me on.
I'm super excited to get to know you a little bit. This is our first time meeting. And just looking at your bio, you seem very, very much more active and in shape than me. When I see a lot of marathons and stuff going on in there. We'll get to that in a second. But could you just tell us a little bit about what you do now? And then we'll just kind of dive into your story.
Yeah, sure. I'm 37 years old, based in London, the UK. I feel like I'm auditioning for a date. So I'm amongst some of the Indians from India on my family. Probably I would be. They'd be like, brilliant, we'll send that on. We'll do the rounds. So yeah, 37 years old, based in London, UK, British born, Indian ancestry, I run a marketing company. I guess because in the 6 years we've been running, we're about 110 people. The core of our business has, I guess, grown and transformed. We have a couple of coffee shops. We do catering events. We have started an accounting and legal practice. So the marketing is probably about 40% of it now, but I know we'll dig into that. That's what I do here and now. Yeah. And that's what I've been doing since I turned 30 pretty much.
So you strike me as someone that probably has an entrepreneurial spirit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah,
very much
absolutely
so.
Fair to say.
And we definitely have a ton of entrepreneurs, myself included, which is, and someone just asked me last night, what's it like to own your own business? And I said, it's like bipolar. It's the best way I can say it. It's like the best and the worst. And, on the great days, you can't imagine doing anything else. And then on the worst days, you're like, well, I just want to work for somebody sometimes.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, first of all, the name of the company.
Yeah, sure. So Pearl Lemon Group, Lemon, pearl like a pearl necklace, one you'd wear around your neck. Second word, lemon. It's on this little t-shirt with, a calligraphist or a font person, or the late Steve Jobs would say this typeface is absolutely terrible. I'm reading I'm reading the biography by Walter Isaacson right now. And it was just funny thinking about logos and fonts, and then me looking at my logo and my font. And I thought, wow, this is something I made on Vistaprint back when I started. And then we just stuck with it throughout. So the name comes from, if I'm being honest, I was looking for something that was unique, something that could be anything iconic, let's say, if you will. You wouldn't hear the word Pearl Lemon and necessarily think that, okay, great, you're, Pearl Lemon Communications, Pearl Lemon Marketing, Pearl Lemon Digital. You could have those, enders at the end of it. But that's what I was looking for. And then it was just a combination. At the time, I was thinking about a name. My fiance, now girlfriend at the time, she used to wear pearl necklaces. And the village where she's from in Italy, they use a lot of lemon for dressing. And I was still using, mayo, French salad dressing and vinegar, balsamic vinegar. And she was like, no, let's use lemons. And I think it being a bit subliminal, I just, in one of those domain name availability generators, like, oh, Pearl Lemon, is that available? And I was like, oh, wow, it's available. The .com, the .co, the .io. And then I Googled it and I saw there was nothing really there. And that was really that across the course of an afternoon. And we've just stuck with it since then. So we thank Daniela, my fiance, and my team. I don't know if they thank her, I guess, but that's where the name comes from.
It's funny you say that. I think, like, if I was going to make an online quiz to figure out if you're an entrepreneur or not, one of the things is, like, for fun, do you go to GoDaddy and just put names in? Because I think you just default to that sometimes. You're like, oh, that's a good idea. Could that be a business? You're never going to do it.
Could that be a business?
Time, right? But
yeah,
right.
Exactly. It's exactly that. You go immediately to GoDaddy. I use Namecheap a little bit these days. Or you get these AI name generators, and So I do exactly that.
Okay, tell us a little bit. I believe you may have a military background, but tell us a little bit about how you. Well, first let's go way back. Like, what kind of kid were you growing up?
Absolutely.
What excited you? Were there any adventure stories that excited? Tell us a little bit about that.
You know what? I think that I'm like the youngest of five, and I grew up in I say a prototypical migrant family. My folks came over from India in the 70s. They had an arranged marriage. They got married at 11 and 13, children at 15. They would be like my elder sisters. I came along when they were late 20s, early 30s, and I would say that I was spoiled growing up. Spoiled is a relative term. Yes, of course. Yeah. Spoiled in reference to what?
Can I back up? How old were your? I'm sorry to interrupt. How old were your parents when they got married?
11 and 13. The first time they saw each other, they were married. My mom moved over. Is that common? Where we were from, yes. So what's interesting is the Simpsons, everyone knows it. Matt Groening, genius, and Apu in The Simpsons. What's interesting about that character? It's a decent, although slightly caricatured, it's a decent insight into the economic move that many migrants made to both the US as well as the UK, i.e., in search of better work, and because of course, the Commonwealth and the relationships that existed at that time, it did mean that in search of a better life, if you will, you could migrate for economic prosperity. But of course, in order to be able to migrate, and that's the interesting thing, if you look at Apu, I think from memory, he may well be Sikh by background, and he's, I think, of the merchant class. So Apu, I think, is qualified maybe as a doctor. All of his parents are educated, all of his family rather are educated, but because he can't get the relevant documentation for his actual profession, he ends up running a 7-Eleven. Right. And that's exactly what happened for a lot of migrants in the UK and in the USA. But to do that, you got to be able to afford a ticket to get on a plane, and to even have a ticket, you got to have documents and civic identity. So what's unusual in our instance was our route to the UK wasn't through that prototypical, it's a word I'll use again, background for most economic migrants. Yeah. So my parents were from a farming, rural background, and it's really because of my grandfather. He, in search of putting food on the table of his family, being a villager, went to the nearest city and basically got work as a sweeper, a cleaner. So he would brush the floor outside the the British Embassy office every day, and that was what he did to make a living. You know, my parents have no passport, or they don't know their date of birth. When they were born, none of that existed. And the schooling, if you go back to the village where we're from, I'm 37 now. I went back when I was first memory of going back was when I was 18 years ago. Dude, I went to a place that was akin to what I see on some of these like East African aid adverts, where you see help a Kenyan. Well, that's a bit maybe not as East, but help a Kenyan, help a Somalian. Yeah. When I went back to it shocked me to go to there's no running water, there's no electricity. This was back in 2004, so it's long ago is relative for maybe even you more so. For me, it doesn't feel that long ago. For 20 something like 2004. When was that? But it was strange to see that, and that's the background that my family came from. So it's unusual for most migrants in the UK and probably the USA to have come from a background like that because of the whole ticket thing that I just described. Yeah. The way that we were able to afford passage was my grandfather, who's since passed, used to have cigarettes and used to share cigarette breaks with a guy who used to always come out. He used to always see this guy sweeping, and they just got talking and they became like cigarette smoking buddies. Yeah. And it was from there that this whole journey started, where he said, okay, great, I'm going to help you form a civic identity. I'm going to help you understand how to actually get a passport. And it was my grandfather who set off on a journey there. He went originally to Singapore. So the goal was to settle in Singapore. He took his eldest son with him. But as it turned out, the my grandfather didn't understand that at that time you needed to, I think, register locally your son to achieve or receive naturalization. I don't know the actual administrative semantics of it. But what it meant was that, I can't, he'd been there 3 years, again, doing labor work, was there with his eldest son, my uncle, and was like, so my son can't get actual identity here. So he went back to India and he started the journey again. And then slowly, my grandfather came by himself in the 70s, moved to Little India here in London, didn't speak any English, went to the local airport, worked, 100-hour work weeks to make ends meet. 2 years over, about 6 to 8 months rather later, he'd saved up enough money to buy a ticket for his wife, my grandmother, and slowly, one by one, my family came over. So if you were to meet my brother, several of my cousins, my uncle, everyone worked at Heathrow Airport, dude.
Wow.
Because that was where you could go get 80% of my elder family all worked at Heathrow Airport, because my grandfather got the first job, and then they were like, dude, you don't speak any English, but you outwork bloody everyone else in the room. So we need more people like you. So then he slowly began to bring in my family. So, 50% of not me, but my brother and above, my brother, my mum, my dad, several of my cousins, my aunt, because I'm the youngest, all worked at Heathrow Airport. So the 11 to 13 thing, where we're from, was usual. Within the context of India, I still think it was very unusual. It just so happened, by fortune, we got access to this path, to which I'm thankful for. So bit of a long-winded story, but that's why they got married so young.
Well, and what it actually reminded me of was my family background. My family line came from Ancestry.com tells me I'm actually 85% British, 15% Irish. So it just came back and said super white is what it said. And but we settled in Appalachia here in the U.S., which is kind of a mountain region and very historically poor. And my grandmother was married at 13, which in the U.S. is back then was in that area was kind of normal, but not really anywhere else. I think my grandfather was like 19 or something, but she started having babies when she was 14, 15. And growing up, I was always like, why are my uncles the same age as my grandma? I'm so confused about this. But it's not probably not as dramatic as yours, but it definitely was. Then my dad had kind of an upward mobility story, right? Where he took a few jobs and ended up getting a promotion that moved him out of that area. And but it's just what's interesting to me, and the connection I feel is being just one generation or 1.5 generations removed from such a different experience that I think it's just it's both humbling and just honestly can be just kind of like confusing. Just trying to make sense of how did I get how did all this happen?
Absolutely. I think both. And I know that we're here to talk about, of course, leadership, and I think that of course there's different ways that leadership is demonstrated and exemplified. And my dad, and so my parents got married at 11 and 13, but it was my grandfather on my mum's side who came over. So at the time they got married, my mum flew back to India because she moved here when she was 7, flew back at 11, met my father who was 13. They had a local Indian marriage that wasn't recognized by the law. Mm-hmm. My mum flew back, and then they didn't see each other again for 2 years, because at that time my grandfather still couldn't afford a ticket for my dad to come over. And my dad's father had died, and at that time there were issues within his family because there were questions of infidelity, because my grandfather. So there were all these issues, and my dad at that time had to support his kind of family, if you will. So at 14, 15, he went away to work in the city as well. He'd sometimes go a day and a half without eating, because it was like, well, we don't have food to put on the table. It is what it is. So having come over to the UK, I reflect upon it when I talk about my family. It's like my dad is my inspiration, and I see the look of pride that my father has, that oh wow, sacrifices, coming to the UK and still living a bit of a shitty life by many measures, I'm sure. 100-hour work weeks, driving a truck at Heathrow Airport, and I feel a huge sense of indebtedness that I've been given this gift of a Western education. I've been given this gift of opportunity and freedom and electricity and bloody internet. I hope to live up to my father's work ethic and his dedication and devotion to those people around him. And that's something that drives me a hell of a lot when I think about, what is success for me? And at its simplest in some ways is like, man, I just want to make my dad proud, dude. He did a lot for me. I kind of want to, pay it back or pay it forward to pay it back.
Which people usually go one of two ways with that, right? And you say you're spoiled, but in a sense, the second, third generations of folks can be spoiled in the sense they don't have that desperation anymore, so they don't access maybe the same drive that their parents and grandparents had. But it sounds like a lot of your passion is coming from gratitude and paying it back. But I do want to ask you about that, because whenever I see resumes like yours, you're not messing around. And I love that you put stuff in there that's not work related, but you're a very driven guy, obviously. And I'm curious, can you talk just a little bit about the marathons and ultra marathons and all the stuff you've done? Yeah. But also, I'm more curious about, since I feel like we're connecting, I'll ask it as honestly as I know how, is where do you feel like that drive is coming from in terms of like maybe a healthy place versus maybe when you're younger trying to prove something to yourself that might be a little less healthy? Because whenever I see that on someone's resume, first of all, I just get exhausted and feel like I've done nothing with my life. But I do wonder when people have that sort of like action-oriented mentality. So talk a little bit about that. What is that in you, and where do you think it's coming from?
So I think that there's definitely an overarching theme across anyone who commits any kind of masochism almost. It is that to a degree. Any feat of endurance, I think, suggests that there's any feat of endurance is by nature imbalance. And to go through imbalance, you have to be willing to suffer. And people that are willing to suffer normally have suffered at its simplest level, I think. Yeah. You don't necessarily seek suffering if you've come from a place of comfort. This is of course very broad, and I'm sure there's many exceptions, but I do agree, and I'm no exception to that, I guess. If I'm being honest, I look at my own resume and I look back at my 20s versus my 30s. I'm much, much happier as a 37-year-old and you were saying you're much fitter than I am. and I wanted to say back then, like 15 minutes ago, but looks can be deceiving because I'm damn out of shape comparatively. So physically, was I in great or better shape then? And in some aspects mentally, yes. But from a happiness perspective, dude, I'm much happier now. Mm-hmm. What did it take? Where did it come from? I think some of that imbalance, it came from my family upbringing and the onward impact that having family that ultimately focus upon survival. If we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they say a common trope amongst migrant families is that you don't get much further beyond the first two values, which are basic nourishment and basic sustenance. And that's quite classic for anyone who comes from a more deprived background. You put food on the table, and that's ultimately what success looks like. Great, I managed to put food on the table. There's no time to do anything else. And I think that created a lot of emotional discord within me. And that manifested through my 20s through bad relationships. But what do I mean by bad relationships? Probably me being overly anxious in relationships, having a need for, let's say, love and attention, and not necessarily getting that through the relationships I was in. So then seeking distractions, seeking salves, seeking alternate forms of happiness. And that's what you see on my resume. That's the marathons, that's the ultra marathons, that's applying to the military, that's getting tattoos all across my body. That's all of those, if you look at it on a time continuum, the vast majority of that happened between probably the ages of 23 and 27, the majority of it, and there's bits on either side. And if I think about my happiness continuum, that's probably when my happiness was at its lowest. I think looking back at it, no one would necessarily know that meeting me, because you have some level of intelligence, you can talk a good game. But I look back on it as let's say I've matured and I've had a lot of therapy. I tried relationship therapy. I tried CBT was the type of therapy that changed things for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think my drive was trying to find some kind of peace and happiness. I think that led me to saying, okay, well, this isn't making me happy. Like I'm in a relationship and I'm not happy, and I'm out of a relationship and I'm even more unhappy.
Right.
Let's go and distract myself. Let's do a marathon. Let's do an ultra. Let's get a load of tattoos. Let's go travel. So you're right. You're right.
First of all, thanks for being honest with that. I've been in therapy myself, and anytime mental health comes up on this podcast, this is not, you can tell we're just having a conversation. We'll see where it goes. But this is not supposed to be a mental health podcast, but I get more feedback on that than anything else. Just folks saying, thank you for being honest about that. And because as leaders, I think the old school leadership was keep that close to the vest, right? That it's weakness if we need help. And there's very much, thankfully, people are just grateful when leaders are honest about that, because we're all dealing with it. And you don't, maybe being a leader itself, and especially being an entrepreneur, is exactly what you're talking about, of being a bit of of asking for suffering at some level, right? It's a life. A marathon, it might be a good metaphor of leadership. Yeah. But let's kind of switch to that, because I'm curious. Obviously, you told a very an uncommon common story of all of us in our 20s of trying to, the phrase is find ourselves, but trying to work out some of our own stuff. And part of your journey was becoming a leader. So how do you see that parallel? Like, I'm curious what kind of leader you were in those years where you were getting the tattoos and running the marathons, and how that may have shifted as you became, to use your words, more happy. That's a great question. I think that if I think of leadership through my 20s, I think I was probably more, it's a great question. And I'm definitely more chaotic, definitely more inconsistent, definitely more prey to my own emotions, definitely more charismatic, I think, because charisma was a vehicle that I used to cover my unhappiness. So I was well practiced in being charismatic. Can cover up a multitude of weaknesses typically. Right?
Cover up all of the therapy that I was in or needed or was in search of. It was easier at times to just cover it, and that reflected in some of the limited kind of business success I had. But there wasn't. I think that what was absent and what's different today, the big thing, I think, was my consistency of leadership. I definitely wasn't reliable through my mid-20s. I think that I was the guy that had a lot of ability, perhaps, but I wouldn't back myself, because I'd be like, you know what, this guy's fantastic. Let's see if this guy clocks in at 7 a.m. in 6 months from now. I think he's going to get bored and do this and do that, or something's going to happen. And so I think that the big thing that sorting my headspace out has given me is consistency. So consistency and discipline at sticking with one thing, and that has been a dramatic shift. So it's allowed some skill that was there. Perhaps it was always there to grow and shine and show more, perhaps. So I feel that I wasn't consistent in my 20s, and that's because I was also emotionally inconsistent. I was subject, like you said, the bipolar thing, and now it's still there, but it was definitely much less contained in a sense through my 20s.
So if I was painting with a broad brush, because all of our stories are so similar. Mine's, like I said, mine's completely different and exactly the same as yours. But there's usually a combination of a deep failure or something either from the inside or outside, like a deep missing the mark at some point, and just you often combined with like a mentor or someone's voice coming into your life. And I'm just curious, you can take that either or both directions, but what happened? What was the catalytic thing or person you feel like that led you to be, for lack of a better word, healthier now?
Oh, that would be, thankfully for you, maybe not for me, because I'm going to spend my life with her. That would be my fiance, Daniela.
Okay.
it was and is. So I had a history of trouble seeks trouble. So I had historically relationship partners that had their own tempestuous background. So it wasn't as black and white in respect of looking at the relationship problems we had and were having and saying, oh, that was clearly my fault, because I was with partners that had a whole world of trouble that they brought to their relationship. Daniela was the first person I was and am with that it was quite clear as day that, oh wow, I screwed this up pretty good all by myself. And it was really the first time where we kind of broke up. I mean, she broke up with me a couple of times, but I looked back on it and I was like, oh, Deepak, you screwed this up all by yourself, and you want to be with this woman. She was from a good family, a good background, had completely different relational and mental models of what happiness looked like. And that was something that was absent in terms of the models that I've been introduced to. So that was a huge motivation, that a huge driver for me to get into therapy, because otherwise I'd post-rationalize stuff and intellectualize it. But there it was like, okay, you clearly don't have all the answers, because there's also a pattern of mistakes I was making. But this time the pattern was absent any baggage the other person brought into the relationship.
Right.
So my same behaviors were reappearing across relationships. I get angry and I'd swear and I'd say stupid shit and I'd say regrettable things. I'd be like, oh, why don't you just head back to Italy, or screw you? Or I'd get angry and I'd walk off at 11 p.m. when she's in, we live in London, but she was here by herself. She came on holiday, we met, we got together, and I'd get pissed and I'd just leave, or I'd be angry and I'd smash her phone. Just lots of, I'm embarrassed to speak about it, but it was, I mean, looking back on it, it taught me a lot about, oh wow, these are all the ways that as a man you shouldn't be, dude. Like, this isn't cool.
Right.
But it's still embarrassing just talking about it, but that helped me more. That pain was worse than some of the military, the special forces application process, ultra marathons, 8-hour tattoo sessions with no pain meds, and just being like, okay, cool. I never experienced a pain like that before. And I'm just reminded about the whole Tony Robbins quote, true change comes when the cost of change, or where the cost of staying the same rather, is greater than the cost of change. So for me at that moment, she was the catalyst more than anyone else, because it was clear getting her back would mean I changed and developed as a person. When I am asked for the little advice that I am asked, people are like, oh, what's the key? I was like, oh God, you got to sort your mental game out, bro. I was like, if it ain't good in here, it ain't gonna be good out there. That for me, that's been the biggest changer. And if I look at my financial success, my happiness, any success that I've had, it's after 30. And what changed? All of that stuff began to sort itself out, and I began to go through an extreme period, of which I'm somewhere at the beginning of now. I feel like a dedication to like work and be like, okay, great, it's time to build my life's fortune, whatever it may be.
Yeah. I'm just so grateful that you were so honest with that. And what was the Tony Robbins quote again? Could you say that again?
I think the exact quote, it's true change comes when the cost of staying the same is greater than the cost of change.
Yeah, that resonates.
Yeah. And for me,
super true. I have a friend, Jeff, who's a good buddy, and he's a clinical psychologist. And so sometimes he buys me beers and I get free therapy. It's a great deal. But he often says, like, you leadership people, you talk about casting a great vision, and like people need to see a better world and they'll go towards it. And he's like, that's kind of true. He's like, what really motivates people is when they have a clear vision of what they could lose. And he said, and he's like, his take is like, that's not as fun to sell books about, like, and to do TEDx talks about. But there is something about a sober realization that if I don't change, to have a clear vision of what could be lost, is an interesting. That's how my shrink thinks about it anyway.
Well, you're unfortunately, Jeff, in this instance, he's going to be throwing up victory signs because if I look back and think about the biggest catalyzer, it's the fear of loss. It's loss aversion. It's the pain of losing. It was. I mean, Daniela knows it. I was like, she's been the greatest catalyzer for all of the success I've had, because it was like, oh wow, this is something that I love, and it's on me to. It'll be my fault if I lose it. It's up to me, and a lot of that then means I take from, my dad's old school. You put food on the table, you provide. Yeah. That's what that's what my dad, that was like my dad's vision and mission. It was like, okay, great. For me, and I always like encourage others, is like, finding a role model. And it's for me, it's been very intuitive, because it's, lessons learned from just observing my father and realizing over time, oh wow, that's impressive. And then lessons learned from pain. The pain of like screwing things up with Daniela through my 20s, and be like, okay, great, what am I going to do? And I went off on my travels around the world for like 7 months and tried to party it out of my system. And I was like, well, that didn't work. Life still sucks. Right. So what next? Yeah.
Well, man, this is not where I thought our conversation would go, but I'm absolutely sure it was the right way to go. And I just imagine folks listening to this thinking, maybe they thought they were going to get some very, I mean, this is what was supposed to happen. I feel like, I wanted to speak just directly to the listeners and say, as Deepak and I have these conversations around real life stuff, we can deceive ourselves sometimes into putting leadership in like our career box only, and kind of forgetting that the most important person to lead is ourselves, and that we are human beings that are holistic. And we fool ourselves into believing, well, I'm doing great at work, but I'm miserable at home or whatever. It just, people know, you can't hide that. And so, I don't say this very often, but if you're listening to this, maybe you had that prompt to like start therapy or talk to someone, or, that sort of uneasy prompt that is the thing you need to do to get a little better. And I just want to encourage folks, if that popped up, which I know it did for a lot of people, that, take action on it. That's the hardest part, but that first step is going to sort of start to release that weight that you've been carrying around, I feel like, for a lot of people.
Amen to that. I think that I didn't anticipate us heading in this direction also, but when we talk about what's helped shaped my ability to become a leader, it's been clearing out my emotional locker, and that has given me the ground to then grow into someone who could and I guess I do lead to a degree, and I look at my team, the team leaders, the guys that are trying to start up or partner or build the various businesses that I'm involved in, and you see the world through a prism of your own experience, of course, and we're kind of enlightened and both blinded by that. But it's for me, it always has been that get your emotional game in check, dude, and then you can wake up easily 4:30. You can go through the process of reading the books. You can deal with the client losses or the client victories, because it's what carries through is that ability to kind of that emotional almost flatline, because that's what it stoicism. How do you achieve, how do you be stoic at work when you get hit by curveballs and you don't throw the baby out of the bedwater? For me, it's been CBT therapy. That was the cornerstone, and that was because of the realization, you got something great to lose here, so sort your stuff out, dude. And it was 3-year journey, dude. 5-year journey.
I love it, man. I came out of religious heritage, and we would say that's a good word, brother. So thank you for sharing that with us. Deepak, if folks want to get in touch with you, is there social media or website, or what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so guys, just I put some stuff out on YouTube. You could just search my name, Deepak Shukla, and then my website, deepakshukla.com. I've got a lot of blog content that I've written about various aspects of my journey, as well as potentially some of the more tactical stuff. If people are reading my bios and were wondering, well, what is the Special Forces application like, or what is a 27-hour ultra marathon like? Like I've got writings about that kind of stuff as well, if that's what people were looking for. But yeah, my website and YouTube is perfect, brother.
Thanks, Deepak. I really appreciate it. Feel like we're buddies now. I hope you feel the same.
Ditto.
And we'll definitely get you back here and get you on our platform more, because I know you've got a lot of wisdom. So thank you so much for being a part of this.
Ditto. Thank you. Really appreciate it.